Okay, and I think we're live already. It is 5:04 in the capital city of Little Rock. I used to have a coworker. Her name was Miss Kristen. Some of y'all might remember her, but she would always say, "It's so and so o'clock in the capital city of Little Rock, Arkansas." She used to be a radio announcer, so she had a good voice for that. But that's what I'm channeling. It is good to see everybody virtually. Super exciting news. I will say this towards the end of the stream as well, but we are going to be in person next week. We're going to move the time up to 3 because you guys know that we close at 4. So we're going to change this class. I know it's called Live at 5, but it'll be called Live at 3 or Life Skills. That'll kind of be interchangeable. But yeah, we're going to start that next week to be in person. You can still come virtually. If that is what you prefer, that is totally fine. But we're going to have that option for everyone if you wanted to be virtual or come in person. We prefer in person, get to see your faces. We like that better, but it is up to you guys. And so let me see who is with us so far. Bills, that'll kind of be interchangeable. But yeah, we're going to start that next week to be in person. And you can still come virtually. Nothing quite like the sound of your own voice. I've never liked it.
Nobody does.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. Okay, so here's the deal, guys. I tried so hard to log in to the picker wheel, which is what we do to determine the winner of the $100 prize at the end of the month. And I was able to successfully log in on my laptop and get it up on there, but I can't get it up on my iPad. So we're going to do this a really weird way. I'm going to hold up my laptop like this, and we're going to do it this way because that is all that I'm able to figure out. I can't even see it. So if you're new here, we do this once a month at the beginning of every month. You know, November just started. So we tallied up all the attendance for the October people, and we all put you in this wheel for each time you attended. So we're going to spin it at random, and whoever it lands on is going to get a $100 Amazon gift card. So that is pretty cool. So I'm going to spin it, and I'm going to let y'all see who the winner is going to be. I can't see it. Oh, Shanice M. Okay, very interesting turn of events. She is on here 2 times. And there were 125 inputs. So that is crazy. But congrats to Shanice. She is someone who comes up to the drop-in center on pretty much a daily basis. So that'll be exciting to tell her tomorrow that she won. So congrats. I don't think she'll tune in this time because like the drop-in center has been closed for about an hour, and I don't think she's got a way to watch at home, at least that I know of. So congratulations, Shanice. That is super exciting. Hey, Miss Jones. I see Miss Jones is here. Okay. So congrats to Shanice. Lindsay, if you are ready to take it away, I will hand it over to you.
Sounds good.
Yay.
All right. So as normal, if you have not had an opportunity to grab a snack, now might be a good time to do that because it's all about food again. I don't want anybody getting hungry. So we're going to continue our kitchen tips. This week, we're going to focus on cooking and freezing, so different methods of cooking and foods that you can and can't freeze, and how might you do that if you choose to. Okay, so we're going to start with the classic, baking. All right, so baking is really just a cooking process, and it works by removing moisture from your food, and it does this at a constant and even heat. The great news about baking is it can be a super healthy way to cook your food because it doesn't require added fat or moisture, and that helps the food retain all of its nutrients. So some tips whenever you are baking: you can use a silicone mat. Some people use foil. Foil is really great for easy cleanup on your cookie sheets and your pans. A silicone mat is also great for cleanup, and it helps everything sort of like peel off super easily and cook evenly. So that might be something for you to consider. They're not super expensive, and they do make a difference in how your food turns out. You also want to place your pan or sheet as close to the middle of your oven as possible so that all that nice warm air is like completely circulating around your food evenly. And then something that gets confused sometimes is that people think, oh, if I want to like double my recipe, I'll just like increase the time. Well, that might work, but it could also mean that your food will burn and not necessarily cook faster. It might skip the whole cooking part and go straight to the burn part. And so you don't want to, even if you cook it at a higher heat, sometimes you can do that and cook it for a shorter amount of time. Although it's not really recommended because cooking is a bit of a science when it comes to baking and not so much of an art. So baking is one of those things that you really don't want to mess around with, like high temperatures. It will make your food terrible. Also, the thing about baking soda and baking powder is when you use them to bake with or use for leavening or to help your like dough rise. So if you are cooking with a dough or baking with a dough and using baking soda or baking powder to make it nice and fluffy and risen, then you might replace it every 6 months. Those don't last forever. They need to be super fresh to work. So just maybe date it as you use it, open it up, put your date on it, and when it gets to 6 months, toss it and replace it. Also super cheap to buy from the grocery store, like a couple bucks for each of these. So it's worth having like super yummy fresh food. And then you can use a spray, oil, or butter to prevent sticking. I will add a caveat as you get to temperatures over 400 degrees that you should probably stay away from olive oil. Avocado oil is a good one. Some seed oils are another one. Peanut oil. All of these other oils have different smoking points. So if you try to bake with olive oil at a super high heat, it will start to smoke and burn your food, and that will be gross. So make sure you know what each of your oils can tolerate. And then also with butter, I know I've mentioned this before, but some butters are salted and some are not. The salted ones will last longer in your refrigerator, but they also add salt to your food. So if you have salted butter and it's like, okay, add salt, just know that like you're going to have super salty food. So watch out if you're using salted butter of how much salt you're additionally adding, to your food. And then I was baking, sometimes it's good to rotate, either flip or turn your pan halfway through baking it, or maybe 2/3 through baking it. And if you're cooking with a meat, baking with a meat, you want to leave the bone in to help retain that moisture. So again, baking is a process that removes moisture. The bone will help the meat retain moisture so it doesn't dry out and get dry and chewy. Speaking of meats, there's different ways to cook with meats. So mind the recipe, but don't pay too much attention to the time, the cooking time, because it might be shorter and it might be longer. You have to keep like a really close eye on your meats, because the recipes don't account for how thick your cut of meat is, how big it is, the temperature of your oven or your pan or whatever. So if it says 30 minutes, you might want to check it at like 25 minutes. If it says 10 minutes, maybe check it at like 6 minutes. So that way you're not overcooking your food. And then you want to bring most meats up to room temperature before you start cooking them. And this has a couple of benefits. Bringing it to room temperature first will reduce the cooking time. So that's good. And it also prevents the surface of the meat from being overcooked and then the inside still being undercooked. So you want it to be pretty consistent, right? And a good way to do that is to bring it to room temperature first and then cook it. And you also don't want to start off with a cold pan. That's a mistake a lot of people make. You want to start off with a hot pan. For example, you wouldn't want to lay a steak on a cold pan and then heat it up. You want to put a steak on a hot pan, but you also don't want to put a steak on a hot pan directly from the refrigerator. You want to bring it up to room temperature. The only exception is that if it's a super thin cut of meat, then it probably doesn't matter that much if you just like take it from the refrigerator and you put it in your pan. because the whole thing will heat up pretty evenly because it's so thin. Also, when you're cooking with meat, you want to cook larger pieces. We mentioned this on the bone to keep that moisture and flavor. So don't remove the bone before you cook it. That's going to add some nice tender flavor to it. And then the more the meat is cut up, that means that there's more surface area for the juices to get out. So make sure that if you're cut up your meat, that you're soaking it in some sort of like broth, or you're marinating it or cooking it in a sauce. Because if you just put it on a hot surface, all those juices are going to get out of, wherever it can. Okay, so usually it's recommended that you cook meats in 2 stages. So you're going to cook it at a very high heat, and that will get rid of all the bacteria that's on the surface. It also browns the meat surface, which adds like a really nice brown crisp on the outside. And then it adds flavor because it's caramelizing the skin or the outside surface of the meat, and all that caramel, it means the yummy goodness. And then step 2, after you brown it on high heat, you want to bring it down to a low and controlled heat. And it really depends on the cut of meat of how long this goes, but you want to cook it thoroughly. You know you cooked it thoroughly when the inside temperature is between 140 and 160, depending on the meat. And also keeping it at a low and controlled heat will help keep in all that moisture and tenderness. And then also, if it says to cook it for 30 minutes, you may still want to use your meat thermometer. Make sure the inside of your meat is to that 140 to 160, but just remember that it keeps on cooking after you pull it off of the pan, after you take it out of the stove or the oven, because the outside is still kind of working its way to the inside. And it's retaining all of that heat on the inside, so it will keep cooking. So if you might think that you're pulling it off at like a medium rare, and you go cut into it and now it's well done, well, that's why it's kept cooking. Okay, braising is when you're cooking, usually with meat, and you're on the stove top and you're simmering your food on a low heat. And then you use that leftover liquid to make a gravy or a sauce. And it is so delicious when you do that. Some tips is that you want to choose a meat with heavy marbling or a larger fat content. This might be lamb. It could be a pork shoulder or shank, some beef chuck roast, or like a brisket. So maybe you'll see like a beef chuck roast on sale at the store. Go ahead and grab it, and you might want to consider braising it on your stove top. Before you do that, remember, we're going to start with a hot pan. We're also going to pat down the meats with paper towels. We're going to get it dry. This is super important to get like the best brown crust on the outside of your meat. This is how the pros do it, is they pat down the outside with paper towels. You season it really good, like lots of rock salt, pepper, any other seasoning. And then you put it on your hot pan or your hot pot, whatever you're cooking with. And then you flip it and you braise it on all the sides, not just the top and bottom. You want to get those sides too. And what that does is that searing process locks in all the moisture inside of the meat. So now you've got like this really awesome, beautiful brown crust. It's caramelized, it's super delicious. And on the inside, it's still really moist and nice. And then you can finish it off in whatever sauce that you're going to make through a low heat process. You don't want to overcrowd your pot, because we talked about this before. If you overcrowd your pan or your pot, you will actually steam your food instead of sear it. You steam it because when all your food's super close together, that heat gets trapped in between your food and it creates these little moisture pockets, and your food ends up being steamed and sometimes soggy. And you're like, what the heck is going on? I'm trying to like cook it on a hot pot and it's like getting really soggy. But you probably have overcrowded your pan. No big deal. Take out some of your food, let it separate out a little bit, and finish cooking it in batches instead. Okay, so you want to let the meat cook until it naturally releases from the pot. So if you put like a roast on there, for example, and you put it in the middle and you're searing it and it's still kind of like stuck to the bottom, that means it's not ready. It's not ready yet. You want to wait and cook it probably longer than you think until it like naturally releases from the pot. And then you can add in your vegetables and your herbs, and then you cook them down until those are also brown and super yummy and caramelized. And then you can add in like stock, like a veggie stock or beef stock or chicken stock, whatever you want to use, or red wine is great too. You stir, and then you scrape all those brown bits. So when your meat got stuck to the bottom of the pan and your vegetables got stuck to the bottom of the pan, it made these little brown bits. And those brown bits are the most delicious little bits. And you want to make sure that you do not just scrape those off and dump them away. Those are like little power packed bits of yumminess. So you've added in, and the way to get them off is you add in your stock or whatever, your liquid, and you stir them around and you stir them around and you use like a wood spoon and you scrape it off and you mix all those brown bits into your sauce. And then you let it continue on your pan for a long time on a low heat. It will thicken up after, 10, 20 minutes, it'll start to thicken up. And now you've got like this super awesome sauce. All right, sauteing is another stovetop method. This is really good to produce a crisp brown crust on your meat and vegetables. Remember, we're not going to add food to a cold pan. We're going to make sure it's hot enough to brown the food. You should also cook it without a liquid because that will steam your food without a lid because that will steam it instead of saute it. So sometimes you might put a lid over your pan because maybe you got some stuff that's flying out of it. Just turn your temperature down instead of adding a lid because then you'll end up steaming it. And then that can get like really soft, mushy vegetables instead of like those nice crispy brown ones. Unlike frying, the difference is that sauteing uses as little oil as possible to get the most browning crispy effect. So without all that oil in there, you won't get as much crispness. So, the drier the pan, you just want to add a little butter, a little oil, toss it around, and that's going to help get you that brown crispy effect. And this works best when food fits in a single layer. So you don't have to worry about crowding as much, but you want to make sure that your food is in a single layer. It helps it get done evenly and faster. Typically, you would not use a nonstick pan. You probably use like a cast iron or some other like heavy duty pan that's like good for consistent heat. But if you have to use a nonstick pan, you would normally use that for like really delicate foods like fish. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears over to freezing. We talked about cooking, now we're talking about freezing. So if you're going to freeze cooked food, do not take it from the hot pan or the hot oven into the freezer. That's a no-no. You want to let it cool down first for a couple of reasons. One, if you like freeze it too quickly, you will shock the food and it might like release moisture weird. It might increase the level of bacteria. It might warm up your freezer and now you've got like this increased level of bacteria in your freezer because now you warmed it up with this hot food that you stuck in there. So just don't do that. Just cool down your food first and then freeze it. Okay, if you take it out of the freezer, you should never put it back in the freezer unless you've cooked it in between. So if let's say you've taken like brown, beef from your freezer, like ground beef, and you make a sauce with that, like a nice, like pasta sauce with your ground beef. So it was frozen, and then now you cooked it in the sauce. Well, you cooked off all the bacteria, so you can put it back in the freezer. But basically, if you're just like taking it out and then putting it back in the freezer without cooking it, all you're letting is like bacteria grow crazy. Because once it reaches that room temperature, it just starts like multiplying like madness. And then you put it back in the freezer, and it still lives. It still lives. So you have to like cook your food to like kill the bacteria. And then by the time that you pull it out of the freezer again and bring it back to room temperature again, there's like more bacteria. And now we're like in the danger zone. So don't do that. Also, a full freezer is a happy freezer. A full freezer doesn't require as much energy to freeze your food because it doesn't need as much cold air to circulate around everything. So a really full freezer is the most efficient way to run it. If you need like a cheap way, if you don't have like a lot of food in your freezer and you're worried about your electric bill, you might like fill up some water bottles halfway, not all the way, halfway with water and kind of like stick them in between, and that will help fill up like the empty space, the gaps between your food, and will help your freezer run more efficiently. And then also make sure all of your food is wrapped and sealed tightly. If it's not and air gets in there, That's how you get freezer burn. Nobody likes how that tastes. Okay, so good news is that you can freeze things like milk, eggs, cheese, and bread. In fact, bread is great for the freezer. It lasts longer. It doesn't get moldy. It stays fresher. So I actually recommend just storing your bread always in the freezer. If you buy it as a whole loaf, go ahead and please slice it. So that way you're not trying to like take it out and slice it and put it back in, right? So just go ahead and slice it and then freeze it. And then it's like super easy. You want to wrap your loaf in plastic wrap, like super tight. And then you want to wrap it again in foil. And then you put a date on it and it will last up to 6 months, which is like so awesome. So I know if you buy bread from the store, you keep it on your counter, maybe a week or 2 weeks later, it starts getting moldy. Well, this helps it last longer, up to 6 months. You can also do the same thing with milk. You can freeze your milk carton. So let's say you're about to go on a trip and you're like, oh man, I just got this milk. You can put the lid on it, put it in your freezer. Make sure there's like an air gap. Like I'm not saying like don't put the lid on tight, put the lid on tight, but a carton works better because liquid expands. That's why you don't want to use like a glass bottle because it will like shatter. It has like a watertight seal. But you could also put it like in another container, like a freezer container or a freezer bag if you're worried about kind of like it exploding. So you can freeze milk. You can also freeze eggs. You can freeze them whole. I recommend freezing them in beaten portions. So like basically like cracking the egg, beating it like you're gonna scramble eggs and then storing it that way. And you can store it as like individual portions, like 1 or 2 eggs in like a little container. Or you can like just store them in like a bigger container. But if you're gonna store them in a bigger container, remember what we talked about. You don't like let it thaw out and then put it back in the freezer, right? So like that's why the individual portions are better. So you can just thaw out what you need. And then I have personally frozen cheese before because I've been caught buying way too much cheese from the deli counter because I get like, I don't know, I get like cheese crazy when I see all the options and I just start buying cheese that I don't need. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I can't eat all this. So I would freeze it and it works. But if you're buying like a harder cheese, like a Romano or a Parmesan or even a Gouda, the texture can change because it changes the moisture content from the time that it's frozen. It like loses some of its moisture and then it kind of returns back. And then it gets like kind of crumbly and I don't know, it's just not as easy to work with. So just bear that in mind. But the taste generally doesn't change. Okay, so freezing vegetables. Don't ever freeze lettuce. That's a no-no. And really leafy greens in general. I know you can do this with spinach and usually it's best to like cook your spinach first. But usually leafy greens don't really make it in the refrigerator and that's because they have such a high water content. If you think about like, you've ever like gotten pizza with vegetables on it, sometimes your pizza can like get really soggy. Especially if you pull it out of the freezer. And that's because all the water in the vegetables is like getting out and releasing suddenly once it's thawed out. And that can make your pizza really mushy. So just don't freeze lettuce or, most of your leafy greens. You can freeze broccoli. So you load up on broccoli. If it's on sale or whatever, go ahead and cook it until it's just barely cooked. And then put it like on a cookie sheet or some other tray and freeze it that way. So they're all kind of separated in their little florets. And then once they're all hard and frozen, put them into a freezer bag and like seal them up. Carrots and potatoes, do not freeze them when they're raw. They'll get really mushy and gross, kind of like with the lettuce. Instead, chop them up, cook them just like we did with the broccoli, barely done, barely cooked. And then you can freeze your carrots flat on like a pan or a cookie sheet. And then you can tip the bag, tip them onto the bag once they're hard and frozen. And then potatoes, you can like either like make mashed potatoes and freeze them in batches, or you can slice them up flat and then put them on a tray and freeze them like with the carrots and the broccoli. You can also toss in like butter, oil, and spices, especially with your potatoes before you freeze them. And that way you just take them out and you have like a really easy side, like ready to go. And then I know onions last forever. Like we talked about this last time, they last up to a year. But if you just wanted to like go ahead and prep them and put them in your freezer, so it's like super easy to work with later, go ahead and slice them up and then put them in a bag. Like it's that easy. Like once they're hard, you just put them in a bag and you can freeze them for several months. So that's it. Cooking and freezing. Pretty simple.
Yes, nice. Oh, my video's off. Oh, okay. There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. I will say I'm not seeing a whole lot of action in the chat right now. Looks like we've got one person tuning in. We did have Sunny and Regina, so maybe they're still with us. It was really hard for me to not think about anything other than that braised portion. I was really thinking about that and how good that sounds. So I don't know. Maybe that's something for me to try to cook here in a minute. I am going to go to the grocery store at some point this week. So my mom used to make braised beef and it was so good. So I might hit her up and get her recipe. Try about that. So
yeah,
that is awesome. One last call for you guys. If you have any questions about what we talked about tonight, about cooking in general, about getting groceries, storing food, the best way to save it, freezer or fridge, plastic bag, there are a lot of different. Miss Jones says she's here. Yes, love it. So we got Miss Jones with us as always, faithful and true. We love to see it. So that might be it for tonight. Again, any last call for questions? I did not know that you could freeze eggs or milk. That is interesting. That was a new fact for me. I did not know that.
yeah. And it's so much more cost effective to buy eggs in bulk anyway, like the 12 or 18 or 24. Yeah. And so, but you might not use them. You might be worried. So that might be a good way to like save money.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely see that. Vegetables too. I've never thought about freezing vegetables, but that's not a bad idea. We'll preserve them a long time, but I know you got to be careful with what you freeze and how.
That's true. Yeah. But yeah, as long as you cook them down, get rid of bacteria, let them cool off and stuff. But it helps with prep, right? Like you make a bunch of mixed vegetables and like, man, I need something like real fast tonight. You just pull out of the freezer and it's done.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so that might be it for the night. But next week, I think we'll find it to be very different circumstances. I think we're probably going to have attendance was way up, like you guys saw in the picker wheel from earlier. I was about to say in this episode. This is not a TV show. On this live, that there were 125 inputs, which means that there were 120 people who attended the classes throughout the month, and usually it's about 40 or 50. So that is really awesome. So attendance is going up. So I think next week, whenever we are in person at 3, we're going to see a lot more people, have a lot more questions and some more discussion, which makes me really excited. So something for us all to look forward to. Anything else, Miss Lindsay, before we close it out?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you again. These cooking tips are really good. I'm super happy to be here each week, gleaning all this wisdom about cooking and being in the kitchen. So I know I'm definitely absorbing this, and I'll report back with any new things I get to cook with these tips, which I'm sure is going to be plenty. So
awesome.
All righty, guys. Regina, I think you're the only one with us. So be safe, Regina. I will see you in the morning at 10 when you get here. So with that, I will say goodbye, and I will see you guys next week.
Bye.